Hello and welcome to our number talk. Today we are looking at the expression 18 times 22. What we do in a number talk is we use mental math. That means no paper, no pencil, to try to solve this expression. And then we come back together and we look at all the different ways we could have solved this using mental math. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and do that. Pause the video, try to figure out 18 times 22 in your head. When you have your solution, unpause the video and we'll look at all of our strategies together. So the first thing we could have done is we could have looked at the distributive property. And what this does is the distributive property lets us break apart one of our factors, and we end up looking at some partial products. We just do some smaller multiplication, we add it together. So let's see what that looks like here. We took our 18 times our 22, and if you notice, we took our 18 and we split it up into 9 plus 9. So we're going to do two smaller multiplications instead of that big one, because 18 times 22, it's a bit big to kind of do in our head. So we're going to take the 9 plus 9, we're going to take our 22, multiply it by both of those add-ins, and that's going to get us partial products. So really what this is, instead of 18 times 22, we have a 9 times 22. And so 9 times 22, still going to be a little bit big, but we can figure that out. 9 times 2 is 18, 9 times 20 is 180. Add those up, 180 and 18, and you're going to get 198. And then we're going to add that other partial product, another 9 times 22, that's another 198. Probably to figure this out mentally, instead of trying to do all that regrouping, we'd probably do a little bit of compensation. Look at both of those. They're almost 200 each. So 200 plus 200 is 400. And then we ended up adding 2 to each of these to get it up to the 200. So let's take 4 away. And hopefully you got this answer. You got a 396. So how else could we have solved this problem? Well, another strategy is to use the distributive property instead of breaking up the 18. Let's break up our 22. And let's break it up using place value. So take a look at our 22. We're thinking of it in expanded form. 20 plus, let's make that a plus 2. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our 18, we're going to distribute it out, and we're going to say it's 18 times 20. So that's going to be a little bit easier, because anything times a multiple of 10, 100, or 1,000, you just take the non-zero, so 18 times 2, multiply those. So 18 times 2 is 36. And then you're just going to add how many zeros are left over, so 360. So that's pretty good. And then we're going to take the other add-in there and multiply that by 18. So 18 times 2, that's 36. So really we have 360 plus 36. That's easy to do in our head because there's no regrouping. We still get back to our 396. We could also do the distributive property and break apart that 18. Instead of a 9 and 9, cutting it in half, which is usually pretty good, we can also just look at that 18 in place value. So we're going to look at it using expanded form. We're going to say 10 plus 8, and then do that same thing. Let's take our 22 and distribute it out to both add-ins to make partial products. So it's really 10 times 22. So it's that same thing. It's 22 times 1, which is going to be your 22, and then add that 0, so 220. Then we need to add the 8 times 22. A little bit of regrouping here. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 20 is 160, so that's going to be 176. And then we still get our answer of 396. We did compensation a little bit to do some adding, but compensation also works when we're doing the multiplication. So 18 times 22 is a bit much. But what if we looked at that 18 and said, you know what, let's just add 2, and let's just make it 20 times 22. Well, that's a little bit easier. So 20 times 22, we're going to take our 22 multiplied by 2, that's going to be 44. So this whole thing is 44 with a 0, that's 440. But remember, we added 2 groups of 22, which means we need to take 2 groups of 22 away. So that 2 groups of 22, we still got to get rid of it. and that's going to be your 44. So in order to take that 44 away, obviously 40 away is going to get you to 400. We need to get 4 less than that. That's going to get you back to your 396. But that's another way that we could use a different strategy compensation. Now, doubling and halving works pretty well. What we're going to do is we're going to take our 18 times 22, and we're going to take one of our factors. In this case, we're going to take our 18, and we're going to cut it in half. So we're going to divide it by 2. We're going to say, you know what, let's just cut that in half. Let's make that 9. So that's why we've got this gray bar down here. We're going to take one factor, cut it in half. In order for it to stay a balanced expression, though, we have to take our other factor and double it. So that's why we've got two 22s. So double 22, and you're going to get 44. So 18 times 22 is the same as 9 times 44. Now we're still going to have to do a little bit of work here. So 9 times your 40, that's going to be 360. And then 9 times 4 is going to be the 36. You're still going to have to do a little bit of adding to get there, but it's going to be 396. Next, let's look at the associative property. And what this is this is our grouping property. This gives us an opportunity when we have 3 or more factors to change the grouping to see if there's an easier way for us to multiply. So we're going to take our 18 times 22, and we're going to look at 18 in a slightly different way. We're going to break that up, and we're going to say, you know what, it's really 6 times 3. So I just took one of my factors, 18, and broke it up into 2 different factors, 6 times 3. And what this grouping property, the associative property, does, it just lets us switch the groups. So instead of 6 groups of 3, I want 3 groups of 22. You notice I'm keeping my factors the same. I'm just changing the groups. And so now I'm going to look at 3 groups of 22. And that's what I have right here. 1, 2, I've got 3 groups of 22. And that's going to let me skip count by 66s, because that's really what it is. 22 plus 22 plus 22. So I've got 6 groups of this 66. So that's what we have right here. We've got our 6 groups of 66. And so if we skip count by 66s, we'll get 132. 198 gets us halfway there. 264. 330. And then that last one's pretty easy. It's going to be a 396. And finally, we can look at the associative property in a slightly different way. We're going to take our 18, and we're going to take our 22, and we're going to still break up our 18, but instead of breaking it up into 6 times 3, let's look at it in another way. That's 9 times 2. So we're going to take our 9 times 2 and do the same thing of just shifting the parentheses. So we're going to do 9 groups of 2 times 22. So this just groups our factors in a slightly different way. And you notice we've got our 2 groups of 22. So instead of 3 groups of 22, we're just going to do 2 groups of 22, which is going to get us 44. But now we've got 9 groups. We're going to have to skip count by 44 9 different times. So that's going to be 88. That's going to be 132, 176. We're going to get up to 220, 264, 308, 352, and finally back up to 396. So those are just a few ways that we can solve 18 times 22. If you came up with another way, that is fantastic. Go ahead and drop that as a comment on the video. Teachers, if you would like a copy of the slide deck for your own use in the classroom, you can get it on my website, 5minutemath.net.